So it's the election, right? And as much as I'm enjoying watching Rudy Giuliani self-own at every available opportunity, I need a little bit of a palate cleanser. So instead, you and I are going to talk about some of my favorite fictional characters. Because this is my channel and I talk about whatever I want. We're going to talk about Grand Enchanter Fiona. You know, this Fiona. If your experience with Dragon Age is just Inquisition, you might be confused. She's the one who decided that she could just sell Redcliffe to the Tevinter Magisters without either owning Redcliffe or actually being a Grand Enchanter at the time because of the Mage War. I have thoughts about the whole Redcliffe issue, but we're going to address that at the end of the video. The first thing we're going to do is discuss Fiona's very weird life and how she got to be where she was in Inquisition. This story begins in an Orlesian alienage. Far from where she ended up as maybe the last Grand Enchanter of the Circle of Magi, she began life as a fairly normal, very poor elven child. At some point, her parents both died, leaving her homeless, and she was tossed out onto the streets. Rough, huh? Well, spoilers, hang on to your butts, folks. It's gonna get a lot rougher. Not long after that, Fiona met several men who said they'd be willing to give her food and a place to sleep. Being a naive little kid, she took them up on it. This was very, very bad. The demon had impersonated the human man who brought her from the slavers that took her in after her parents had died. She had no idea back then who those kind men really were, only that they offered her food and a warm bed to sleep in. She found herself in his luxurious home and thought herself the luckiest little girl in the alienage. Count Dorian, as she learned her new master's name to be, had been in search of an elven he could keep as a pet, something he could put in a pretty dress and bring with him to one of his many trips to the capital, like baggage. But Fiona's a mage, I hear you say. Couldn't she defend herself? Well, unfortunately, she had to find out about being a mage the hard way. Escaping the man had not been easy. Fortune brought her to the notice of an elderly mage on the streets of Val Royeaux, though the Count's fury when he discovered it had been immeasurable. She still flinched when she thought of how he whipped her that night. He had gouged and bled her until she had pled for death, and he had denied her even then. And then she had grown angry. She had dug deep down inside and demanded that whatever talent for magic she had, a talent she didn't even truly believe until that moment, come forth and save her. And it had. It had killed the Count with raw magical force, and she lay bleeding beside his corpse as exhaustion took her. Fiona killed her abuser, but she didn't exactly escape to freedom. After all of this happened, she ended up whisked away to the Circle of Magi. So basically from informal criminal child slavery to formal legal slavery, with only slightly less of a chance of getting abused. Cool. But our girl wasn't satisfied with going from one form of slavery to the other. Instead, Fiona set her laser focus on one of the only ways to exit the Circle of Magi, becoming a Grey Warden. A group of Wardens happened to visit the Circle in Orlais where she was living, and she ended up begging to go with them. I was lucky. I had the talent for magic, a curse for every other person, and yet for me it meant freedom. It meant an escape from the Circle, the lone elf in the tower, uneducated and frightened of anyone who came near me. The mages were just men, I discovered, capricious and sad and bigoted, just like everywhere else. I swore I wouldn't let them keep me, and escaped them too. Yes, that Duncan. This Duncan. As it turns out, the Grey Warden who recruited Fiona also had some trouble with a thief in Ravane. Just a kid at the time, a thief named Duncan was all set to hang until a Grey Warden offered him a chance at another life. Fiona and Duncan had a sort of older sister, younger brother relationship. When he was a new and brash warden, she seemed to take him under her wing, and in the group of wardens they traveled with, the two of them seemed the closest. There are several times this is detailed in the book The Calling, but my favorite evidence can be found in the DLC for Dragon Age 2. There's a pair of axes once owned by Duncan, and one of them, small but sharp, is named Fiona. So that group of Grey Wardens I talked about earlier, they were led by a Grey Warden named Genevieve. Long story short is that she was looking for her brother, and her brother was in the Deep Roads. She had several baby wardens with her, including Fiona and Duncan. Now, she needed to get into the Deep Roads, and there were really only two people who knew how to navigate the specific passage she needed to find. Those two people were King Merrick and Loghain. Now, this was a relatively young Merrick and Loghain, if I have my estimates right, and I'm sure I do because nothing in this book is correct, because David Gator hates both timelines and me. They were about 5 or 6 years out from the end of the Orlesian occupation and about a year out from Queen Rowan's death. I can talk more about that in a different video, but suffice it to say they were both heartbroken she died, and neither one of them was in a particularly good place. Merrick especially had lost his zen, spiraled into a place of deep depression, and had generally stopped caring about everything. So that's how, when this group of Grey Wardens were like, hey, can one of you dudes show us around the Deep Roads? It would have made sense for King Merrick to send Loghain with them if he had sent anyone at all. In a world that made sense. This is not what King Merrick did. Instead, he left his child of questionable age, the tall, dark, and broody, and left to go on an adventure. Seriously, Gator has so many problems with continuity errors. Kaylin has 3 different canon ages in this book. Now, the more astute of you who picked up on some of the subtle as bricks clues in Inquisition will have started to suspect something by now. Yes, what you suspect is true, and yes, this is where it happened. I think most of us knew this was coming, yes? King Merrick and Fiona had the definite hots for each other. There's a lot going on, some heartfelt conversation that you should really read yourself, and then Fiona decides that if they're all gonna die in the Deep Roads, well, at least she's gonna die happy. Those of you who are as nerdy as me and have been obsessing over all the details, you know where I'm going next. In Dragon Age Origins, we're led to believe that Alistair's mother was a nameless maid in the castle, that his big sister is that awful harpy Goldana, and that Merrick was some sort of sex god who was able to trick a hapless maid into having his bastard. Anyone, after reading The Stolen Throne and The Calling, probably called shenanigans almost immediately, because there is no way that this dork is the maid-seducing king from... I fall off horses, he explained to Loghain with a sickly grin. It's this thing I do. What makes way more sense is that Merrick and Fiona's extracurriculars in the Deep Roads led to a prince no one expected. By the end of The Calling, that is exactly what happened, and because she thought her son would be a pariah because of the rampant elf racism in Theta society, she left him with his father. It is a mark of Merrick's unending naivety that he left his son to be raised by his dead wife's brother, but that is another video entirely. As a result of the events of The Calling, Fiona became the only Grey Warden ever in recorded Theta's history to lose the Grey Warden taint. She wasn't just kicked out of the Wardens, she lost everything that made her a Warden. No more weird Darkspawn Spidey sense, no more bad dreams, and apparently, some 30 years later, no early death sentence. As a result of this, she went back into the Circle of Magi, but after a taste of freedom, Fiona decided she needed to do whatever she could from the inside of the circle to earn freedom for other mages. She worked her way to the top, becoming Grand Enchanter and severely peeving a few moderates on her way up, and eventually was instrumental in the Circle of Magi voting to dissolve itself and rebel against the Templars, starting the Templar Mage War. It should be noted that in Dragon Age Origins, if the Wardens survived, they went off in search of a cure for the Grey Warden taint. As of what we know right now, Fiona is the only Grey Warden to ever be cured of it, and she could serve as a crucial source of answers for the Warden. So what was up with that thing in Redcliffe? I want to make a much longer video analyzing what went on in Redcliffe at a later date, but for now, knowing all of this, here is my theory. During the Templar Mage War, if Alistair was king, Ferelden was one of the only countries in Thedas that was openly friendly to mages. It's possible that Fiona fled to the country where her son was king, knowing he was a good man like his father, and that her plan was to temporarily give in to the Tevinter in order to get her son's attention because she needed help. Fiona, of course, didn't expect the Inquisitor's help. She would have no reason to. Going to Redcliffe really only makes sense if she were fleeing there for a reason. Fiona is Orlesian and has, as far as we know, never lived in any part of her life in Ferelden. Her only connections to it were Merrick and later Duncan, who was left behind as Ferelden's Warden commander. It could be she took a chance on getting her son's attention for help and failed miserably, or in a universe where Alistair was not king, maybe she thought Duncan could be some help to her, not knowing he was dead. What about you? What do you think happened? Is there an obscure fictional character you know way too much about? Let me know in the comments below.